Okay, good evening everyone. This is Jake Carter and here with me is John Wong, a professional lawyer. John, nice to meet you tonight.
Nice to meet you too, Jake.
Alright. Okay, one of the hot topics in Malaysia right now would be the Sedition Act of 1948. It's a really hot social issue right now, as many are questioning the need for this act. Some of us want it to be repealed, some of us want to keep it. So could you give a brief description to our audience on what is the Sedition Act?
Basically, the Sedition Act provides for the offense of sedition. Sedition is basically an offense. It's an act which, if done, would have a seditious tendency. Now, the issue is, what is seditious tendency? It's defined in the Sedition Act itself. Like, for example, bringing into hatred or contempt, or to excite disaffection against any ruler or any government. Now that would be seditious. Malay rights, the status of the king, the status of Bahasa Malaysia as the national language, these are actually protected under the constitution, and if you were to question them, it would be seditious.
Okay, well that's a good start. Alright, we understood that Sedition Act is a way to limit freedom of speech, am I right?
Exactly.
Okay, could you tell us the initial intentions of the Sedition Act?
At the beginning, the Sedition Act was enacted by our colonial rulers, the British, and their intention is basically, like what you said, to limit the freedom of speech in order to protect national security. Back then in the 1940s, national security is something which is not as common as it is today. Let's just put it that way, because back then people were fighting, as in there were many different parties actually fighting in order to free themselves from the rule of the British. Like, for example, we have the communists. Their intention was to actually promote and to maintain national securities.
How is that relevant to today's political spectrum, since it's, to be honest, it's quite a dated law?
They used the Sedition Act to actually silence their political enemies, the political opposition. In this case, all these oppositions are not actually enemies of the country. Let's just put it that way. Back then, people were coming in from China, coming in from Indonesia. They were communists. There were people attacking people. Back then, national security is pretty bad. But today, the political spectrum has changed in that we have moved from a direct rule to a democracy. We have an elected government. Nowadays, people have to vote in order to decide who becomes the government. And therefore, it is only natural that people question their government. The thing is that the current government that we are looking at right now, they're actually using the Sedition Act to actually silence these critics. Now, if that's the case, then obviously the Sedition Act has been used out of its purpose. The Sedition Act the main purpose is actually to promote and to maintain national security, silence critic to promote national security. Now in this case, right, in the recent cases whereby they have decided to charge people like Karpal Singh, charge people like Raja Petra. These people are actually criticizing the government, but their criticism is not something which actually is a threat to national security, and that's why I would personally think that
the act has been misused and abused.
Exactly, and that's why today the political spectrum is definitely different, and there is no need for the Sedition Act.
So, okay, we used to have another act that had the similar functions called the Internal Security Act, ISA, but now it is abolished and we have the Sedition Act instead. Could you tell us the difference between the Sedition Act and the ISA?
For the Sedition Act, it's actually an act to silence people. On the other hand, the Internal Security Act is to disable people. Now, let's just look at the provisions. Like for example, in the ISA, a person can be arrested under the ISA and be locked up to 60 days. And for those serious cases, you can even be locked up until 2 years without being brought to court. On the other hand, for the Sedition Act, once you are caught, you are given the normal rights as an arrested person. Like for example, the rights to be brought before the court within 24 hours of your arrest. And if they don't charge you in court, they will have to release you within 24 hours. Now, let's go into something else. Like for example, in the Internet Security Act, the harshest provisions provide for the death penalty. Like for example, possession of firearms. In the ISA, it's the death penalty.
Alright.
Now, on the other hand, for the Sedition Act, the strongest penalty is only a 5,000 ringgit fine and several years of prison. Comparatively, Sedition Act seems to be just a mere slap on the wrist.
I want to know, will Malaysia would ever be at peace if we were to enforce these laws that would so-called protect the interests of the nation?
It's just a case of bias. Like for example, like what you've mentioned just now, there are certain people, certain groups in Malaysia, Perkasa, ISMA, who are clearly stirring racial discontent amongst the people in Malaysia. In order for a criminal prosecution to be brought, it has to be brought by the public prosecutor. And who appoints the public prosecutor? The government of the day. So at the end of the day, it is the public prosecutor who gets to pick and choose who and how and using what to actually charge. So even though you, like for example, certain people do get charged, but at the end of the day, if in court there is not enough evidence, or let's say the public prosecutor decides to go leniently, then at the end of the day, it's just another wayang to just please the people.
Okay, I understood. Now, even the UK has abolished their own
Sedition Act. Correct.
And that being said, that applies to most of the democratic countries today. Most of the Scandinavian countries do not have such seditious act. Most of them do not have any censorship in their media publications, and yet they do live a quite a stable and orderly society. Do you think that Malaysia has a future where we could prosper without the need to be told what to say and what not to say?
As of right now, I would personally think that it's a bit too early to give Malaysians too much freedom. The people here has improved, let's just put it that way.
Yes.
The relations between races, it's improving a lot. People are now trusting each other more and more. Whereby back then it was the Malays and the Malays, the Chinese and the Chinese, the Indians and the Indians.
Everyone to themselves.
Every race for themselves. They would only be able to, as in, get support from their own race. Like for example, back then it was all about UMNO, MCA, MIC.
Yes.
You don't see the Malays vote for the DAP back then. You don't see Chinese vote for the PAS back then. Nowadays, people are accepting. It's just a matter of time that Malaysians can be given the freedom to speak. But as of right now,
it's a little grim.
Control should still be there. But in my opinion, the Sedition Act should not. Sedition Act is just too wide an act.
Alright, okay. Well, the zeitgeist moves on, as they say. We'll surely improve. We'll sure do for the better, not for worse. And I do agree that we are better off without this act. So, yeah, let's just end the interview there. Thank you so much, Mr. John Wong,
for
participating. Yeah, this has been Jake Carter. Yeah, have a good night.